With her hands tied behind her, she stood firm, her jaw clenched tight, determined not to plead for mercy. Yet when a whisper escaped her lips, it caught even her off guard. "You're going to regret making me your choice." The man standing below the platform didn't immediately crack a smile. Instead, he took his time examining her features, the bruises she wore openly, the defiant fire burning in her eyes. Then, slowly and deliberately, his lips curved into a knowing smile. "My only regret is not acting sooner. This opportunity won't come around again." The crowd didn't burst into laughter right away. They were too bewildered, too certain they must have misheard. Eliza Reed had discovered early in life that fear made itself heard through noise, while deliberately chosen silence could serve as protection. She wrapped herself in that silence now, as the auctioneer's voice shattered the morning calm, his words rolling across the square like an inevitable verdict. Though only 23 years old, the unforgiving desert had weathered her beyond her years. The rope dug painfully into her wrists, while the wooden platform beneath her bare feet scorched her skin. Her torn, gray dress was stiff with dried blood from the night she had dared to fight back and paid the price. The square teemed with men from mercy wells, ranchers whose eyes held suspicion, merchants whose hands moved with calculated precision, men who could sense profit the way vultures detected death in the desert heat. They pressed closer, assessing her value without ever truly seeing her as a person. The auctioneer cleared his throat and began his speech about outstanding debts, vagrancy charges, and labor contracts, the kind of language that transformed human beings into commodities. He grabbed Eliza's chin, roughly to display her teeth for inspection. She wrenched herself away with such force that he stumbled backward. Ripples of laughter spread through the crowd, but she remained unmoved. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead as she committed every face to memory. "Who'll open the bidding?" the auctioneer shouted. "Strong and healthy specimen. 1 full year of labor to settle her debts." An uncomfortable silence hung in the air before someone called out a number. Then another voice offered less. Each bid scraped against something vulnerable inside her chest. But she refused to shed tears. She absolutely would not. A man wearing a vest darkened with sweat made a vulgar remark. Another man's laughter rang out too loudly. Eliza felt the weight of it pressing down on her, not the monetary amounts being thrown around, but the casual ease with which they dehumanized her. Then a voice sliced through the gathered crowd. It was calm, measured, and certain. $1. The laughter exploded, sharp and mocking. Men turned in confusion, some sneering, others simply blinking in disbelief. The speaker stood at the crowd's outer edge, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in simple canvas pants, a worn blue shirt faded by time and sun, and boots that had traveled countless miles. He didn't grin or try to make himself larger. He simply stood there, as steady and unmoving as a fence post driven deep into the ground. The auctioneer scoffed dismissively. "That's not even a real bid." "It is," the man replied evenly. "You asked for bids and I'm offering one." Another bidder protested loudly. Arguments erupted about the rules and proper procedure. The auctioneer sputtered in confusion and indignation. But the man never raised his voice because he didn't need to. "I'll take over the contract," he stated simply, "for $1. The crowd roared again with laughter and disbelief. Someone shouted that he must be a fool. Another voice suggested that loneliness did strange things to a man's mind. Eliza studied him carefully, not with hope blooming in her chest, but with the caution that hard experience had taught her. She had long ago learned the crucial difference. The auctioneer sneered at him. "And just what exactly would you do with her?" The man finally looked up then, his eyes meeting Eliza's directly. She saw no hunger lurking there, no cold calculation of what he might gain. There was only recognition, as if he truly saw all of her standing on that platform and refused to turn away from what he witnessed. "Free her," he said simply. The noise seemed to drop out of the world entirely. Even the desert wind appeared to pause and hold its breath. The auctioneer blinked in confusion. "That's not even legal," he protested weakly. "Actually, it is," the man replied quietly. An uneasy murmur spread through the crowd, reluctant and uncertain. Truth had a particular way of doing that to people. The man reached into his pocket and produced a silver dollar, holding it up where everyone could see. It flashed brilliantly in the sunlight, clean and unworn by time. "So, do we have an agreement?" he asked. The auctioneer hesitated for a long moment, then snatched the coin as if it burned his fingers. Documents changed hands with hurried movements. A pen scratched across paper with a signature, and before anyone in the crowd could intervene or object, the man tore the contract cleanly in two. Then he tore it again. The pieces fluttered to the dirt like broken promises. Eliza's breath caught hard and painful in her chest. The man climbed the platform steps toward her, not rushing, not moving slowly, just advancing with steady purpose. He stopped an arm's length away from her. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the ropes binding her wrists. No one had asked her permission for anything in a very long time. She swallowed hard and managed a single nod. His hands were rough from work, but moved with careful gentleness. He worked at the knots methodically, without pulling or rushing the process. When the rope finally fell away, her arms trembled from the sudden release. She flexed her fingers slowly, as if relearning how they worked. "Can you walk?" he asked her directly. She nodded again, not trusting her voice yet. "Then walk," he said firmly, "and don't look back." Eliza stepped down from the platform, each footfall feeling surreal and impossible. The crowd parted reluctantly before her, some muttering under their breath, others simply staring. She walked through them with her head held high and her hands finally free. The man fell into step beside her, close enough to shield her if needed, far enough to respect her space. At the square's edge, her knees suddenly buckled beneath her. She caught herself against a hitching post, her breath finally shaking loose from her chest. "Why?" she demanded, the question sharp with lingering fear. "What exactly do you want from me?" He looked out toward the open land stretching beyond the town. Red earth met endless sky. "My name's Thomas Avery," he said, "and I don't want anything from you." She laughed once, the sound bitter and disbelieving. "Men don't do things like this for nothing." Thomas nodded slowly. "I had a sister," he said. That was all he offered at first, but it was enough to hang the truth on. "They took her," he continued after a pause. "Years back. By the time I finally found her, I was too late to help." Eliza felt the anger drain from her body, leaving something hollow and heavy in its place. "When I saw you up there on that platform," he said, finally looking at her again, "I knew exactly what too late looked like. I wasn't going to let myself be too late twice." She searched his face carefully for the lie she expected to find. She found nothing but truth. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted. "I've got a ranch," he replied without hesitation. "East of here. Small place, hard land, but there's a room available. No strings attached to the offer." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against her experience, then slowly nodded her acceptance. They rode out of Mercy Wells beneath a sky that burned white-hot overhead. After they'd covered about a mile, a voice called out from behind them, warning and cruel in equal measure. "You'll regret this," a man shouted after them. "That woman's nothing but trouble." Thomas didn't even turn around to acknowledge the voice. "The only thing I regret," he said evenly, "is not getting there sooner." Eliza faced forward, her heart pounding as the town fell away behind them, and the desert opened wide before her. She had no idea what waited at the end of this road. But for the first time in years, it was her own choice to find out. The journey lasted 3 hours exactly. Eliza counted each one as it passed. The land stretched out empty, and honest around them. Nothing but scrub brush and stone beneath a sky that never apologized for its harshness. Thomas rode a few paces ahead of her, maintaining a comfortable quiet, letting the steady rhythm of the horses settle what words couldn't accomplish. He checked on her without staring, adjusted their pace when her hands stiffened on the reins, and said nothing when she winced from pain. At a shallow spring, he dismounted and offered her water. She drank like someone slowly relearning what trust felt like. The cold water shocked her teeth painfully. She welcomed the sensation. They didn't exchange words until the ranch finally came into view. A low house, a leaning barn, and a windmill ticking away like a tired clock, measuring time. "This is it," Thomas said simply. It wasn't much to look at, but to Eliza, it was everything she'd stopped hoping for. Inside, the house was clean and plainly furnished. One table, 2 chairs, a stove blackened by years of constant use. 2 doors led off the main room. Thomas opened one and stepped aside without entering. "That room's yours," he said. "It locks from the inside." She noticed that detail first. The bolt on the door, the simple promise it represented. When he left her alone, she slid the bolt home and leaned against the door, her body finally shaking with release. The room was small, but the bed was clean and made. There was a basin, a pitcher for water, and a window with actual glass. She washed the accumulated dust from her skin and stared at her wrists, raw, bruised, but free. That night, they ate together in comfortable quiet. Bread, meat, water. He told her she could eat more if she wanted. She didn't take more. Sleep came hard when she finally lay down. When it did arrive, it brought dreams she had no names for. Morning brought the rich smell of coffee. She woke to find a single wildflower in a tin cup sitting on her windowsill, purple, delicate, and unexplained. Eliza touched it gently, as if it might vanish at her touch. Days passed, filled with work. Thomas taught her without commanding or ordering. Fence posts, feeding animals, managing water. How to move with the land's rhythms instead of fighting against them. He never asked about her past, never stood too close to her, never entered her room uninvited. She found herself waking earlier than necessary, watching him mend equipment by lamplight, sitting with coffee in the quiet hours before dawn broke. The peace of it felt dangerous somehow. On the 7th day, a rider appeared at noon. Eliza spotted him first, dust rising on the horizon, a single figure moving fast toward them. Thomas went very still, his hand moving instinctively to his belt. "Inside," he said firmly. She didn't argue with him, but she didn't hide either. She took the rifle from its place on the wall and positioned herself where she could see without being easily seen. The rider stopped short of their fence line. He was young and clearly nervous. He tipped his hat respectfully. "Mr. Avery," he called out. "Name's Luke Barton. I ride for Calvin Ross." Eliza's stomach tightened painfully. She knew that name all too well. Thomas's voice remained level and controlled. "What does Ross want?" "Checking on a woman," Luke explained. "One who was taken from an auction recently. Folks are asking questions about her whereabouts." Thomas took a deliberate step closer. "Is Ross suddenly concerned about women's welfare?" The question hung sharp in the air. Luke flushed red. "I'm just delivering a message, sir." "Then deliver this one back," Thomas said clearly. "Eliza Reed is free. She stays here by her own choice. Anyone who bothers her will answer to me directly." Luke hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his saddle. "There's talk in town, sir. People are saying things." "There's always talk," Thomas replied dismissively. Luke nodded and rode off, leaving dust in his wake. That night, Eliza couldn't find sleep. "They'll keep coming," she said from the doorway, her voice quiet but certain. Thomas looked up from the table where he sat. "Maybe so." "You shouldn't have to pay for my trouble," she said. He set his cup down with careful deliberation. "You're not trouble. The words settled deep inside her. Heavy, dangerous, important. And now, I want to pause here for just a moment and ask you, dear viewers, where are you watching this story unfold from? Are you listening from your home? Perhaps during your commute? Or maybe you're relaxing somewhere far away? Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're joining us from. It means everything to know this tale is reaching hearts across distances. Now, let's return to Eliza and Thomas's journey. The visits from town didn't stop coming. Men kept passing through on thin excuses, their eyes always measuring and calculating. On the 10th day, Eliza finally said what had been building inside her. "Maybe I should leave," she offered quietly. Thomas froze at her words. "Is that truly what you want?" he asked carefully. "I don't want to destroy what you've built here," she explained. He met her gaze directly and held it. "What I've built here doesn't matter at all if it costs someone their dignity." She stayed. The town did not forgive them for it. When they went in together for supplies, hostile looks followed them everywhere. Whispers cut through the air like knives. A woman spat out a name that Eliza had worn before and worked hard to shed. Thomas stepped between them immediately, quiet but absolutely unmovable. The ride home passed in heavy silence. That night, Eliza lay awake listening to the house breathe around her, to Thomas pacing somewhere nearby, to her own heart stubbornly refusing caution. She knew then with absolute certainty that she loved him. She hated herself for being foolish enough to feel it. It happened 3 weeks later. A man arrived after nightfall, desperate and bleeding fear into the darkness. He brought a girl with him, barely 16, bruised, half-conscious. "They're hunting her," the man explained frantically. "Bounty hunters with contracts. The paperwork says she belongs to a house in Tucson." Thomas didn't hesitate for even a second. "Bring her inside." Eliza immediately took charge, cleaning wounds, whispering steady truths, seeing herself reflected clearly in the girl's terrified eyes. Her name was Rose. They worked through the entire night. Barricaded doors, loaded rifles, drew lines in dust and conscience that couldn't be uncrossed. At dawn, riders appeared on the horizon, 5 of them, armed and confident in their authority. Thomas stood on the porch, blocking their path. "You're not taking her." The leader smiled like he'd been waiting years to hear exactly those words. "The law says otherwise, friend." Eliza watched from the loft above, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see the calculation written plainly in the men's eyes. They were doing mathematics of violence. They left with a promise to return, and everyone knew they meant it. That night, they made plans. Rose couldn't stay here, not with hunters circling like vultures. "We run," the man who'd brought her suggested. "No," Eliza said firmly. "We create a distraction instead." Thomas turned to her sharply, alarm in his eyes. "No, absolutely not." She met his gaze without flinching. "They don't know her face well enough. Not anymore. Not if we're clever." Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. "I can buy her the time she needs," Eliza explained. Thomas's voice broke slightly. "I won't trade one life for another. I refuse to do that." "I'm choosing this," she said, her voice steady, "just like you chose for me." The plan formed between them like a wound, ugly but necessary. At dusk, Rose left hidden in a wagon heading west toward safety. Eliza stayed behind. When the riders came back as promised, they found her, hands bound again, a horse beneath her, night beginning to swallow the ranch behind them. She caught Thomas's eye once as they forced her to ride away. "Don't follow," she tried to say with her expression. "Come for me," she meant with every fiber of her being. The desert closed in around them. Hooves pounded against hard earth. Somewhere behind her, she knew a promise was taking shape in Thomas's mind. She whispered it to the darkness like a prayer. "Please be on time this time." The men rode hard through the entire night without stopping. Eliza learned quickly how pain transforms and changes shape when you're expecting it. The rope burned her wrists raw. The saddle rubbed her skin until it bled. Fear pressed in from all sides like suffocating heat. But beneath all of it ran a steady current of determination and resolve. She counted the turns they made, watched the stars for navigation, memorized distinctive rock shapes and the way the land sloped beneath the horse's steady hooves. She would not disappear quietly into the night. They finally stopped near dawn in a narrow canyon cut deep into stone, where the wind couldn't penetrate. The men laughed too loudly, passed a bottle between them, and argued about money and shares. Eliza remained silent, keeping her head bowed, deliberately letting them believe she was smaller and weaker than she truly was. The leader, a thick-necked man with an ugly scar running down his cheek, crouched directly in front of her as the light began to rise. "You don't look 16 years old," he said suspiciously. Eliza swallowed hard. "They make you old fast out here." He grabbed her wrist roughly, turning it to study the calluses and scars that marked her skin. Something shifted behind his eyes. Understanding, then anger. By mid-morning, his suspicion had crystallized into certainty. "She's not the girl we're looking for," he announced to the others. "We've been played." The blow came fast and brutal. White light exploded behind her eyes. Blood filled her mouth. Eliza didn't scream or cry out. She refused to give them that. "Where is she?" he snarled, his face inches from hers. Eliza smiled through her broken breath, tasting copper. Long gone by now. That smile cost her dearly, but it was absolutely worth the price. Furious, they turned back toward the ranch to find their real quarry. Thomas Avery did not wait around for certainty or confirmation. The very moment the dust cloud faded behind the departing riders, he moved into action. He saddled 2 horses with quick, efficient movements, grabbed rifles and ammunition, filled canteens with water, coiled rope. He didn't pack carefully or methodically. He packed fast because speed mattered more than precision. An older ranch hand named Caleb met him at the fence line. Graybeard, steady hands, eyes that had seen trouble before. "I'm coming with you," Caleb stated simply. Thomas nodded once. That was all the acknowledgement needed. They followed the trail Eliza had left without meaning to. A torn strip of cloth caught on a branch, a scuffed stone, marks that only someone who understood loss would think to look for. "She's still alive," Caleb said quietly as they rode. "I know," Thomas replied with absolute conviction. They rode hard until night swallowed the land completely. The canyon was a deep scar cut violently into the earth. The men had chosen their position well. High ground, narrow passages, no easy approach. Eliza was tied to a twisted juniper at the bottom, her wrists numb, her face swollen from beatings. But she kept her eyes open and alert, listening carefully to everything around her. She heard Thomas before she saw him approaching. The first gunshot cracked the air open like thunder. Then another followed. Then complete chaos erupted. The men scattered in panic, shouting confused orders, firing blindly into shifting shadows. Thomas moved through it all like a storm that had been gathering strength for years. He didn't shout threats or waste words. He advanced with deadly purpose, every step measured and deliberate. Caleb flanked left, moving steady and precise through the rocks. Eliza worked frantically at the rope binding her wrists, her fingers slick with blood and determination, moving slowly but carefully. A man suddenly slipped down the rock face toward her, young and nervous. She didn't hesitate even for a heartbeat. The stone fit her hand perfectly, like fate itself. When his rifle clattered to the dirt, she seized it without thinking. She began to climb upward through the rocks. The canyon rim exploded into deafening noise and choking smoke. Men fell. Rock shattered from bullets. The air filled with the smell of iron and dust. Eliza spotted Thomas pinned behind a boulder, desperately reloading his rifle. A man rose up behind him, his rifle lifting to take aim at Thomas's unprotected back. She aimed as steadily as her shaking hands allowed. The recoil from firing nearly knocked her off her feet entirely. The man behind Thomas dropped heavily. Thomas spun around at the sound. Their eyes met across the chaos. Everything they'd never said aloud lived in that single moment of connection. The leader charged then, both pistols drawn, naked rage distorting his features. Eliza's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment. Thomas stepped forward, empty-handed, to meet him. They collided with brutal force, fists, bone, breath knocked violently loose. The leader managed to get both hands around Thomas's throat and squeezed with murderous intent. Eliza screamed his name, the sound raw and desperate. Thomas drove his thumb viciously into the man's eye and rolled free of his grip. He didn't stop his attack until the man stopped moving entirely. Silence fell across the canyon, sudden and heavy. Caleb efficiently tied up the surviving men. Thomas staggered slightly, exhausted. Eliza reached him first, moving as fast as her battered body allowed. "You came," she said, the words simple but containing everything. "Always," he answered, his voice hoarse but certain. They rode back slowly, wounded but alive, carrying the weight of survival. The ranch came into view beneath a pale sky. It looked smaller now somehow, but stronger too, more real. Thomas helped Eliza down from her horse with gentle hands. She leaned into him without thinking about it, without questioning the impulse. He held her, like it was pure instinct, rather than conscious choice. "I thought I'd lost you," he said quietly into her hair. "You didn't," she replied firmly. "You were exactly on time." That night, as lantern light flickered warmly through the room, Thomas finally spoke the words he'd been carrying inside since that auction block. "I love you," he said simply. Eliza laughed and cried simultaneously, emotions overwhelming her. "I've loved you since the flower appeared on my windowsill," she admitted. "I was just afraid to say it out loud." "Me too," he confessed. They didn't rush anything that followed. They sat close together, held hands, and let the truth settle between them like something solid and real. News traveled fast across the territory. The bounty hunters were arrested, their paperwork was questioned and investigated. Laws were bent until they finally broke under scrutiny. Rose was confirmed safe. A letter arrived weeks later, postmarked from California, mentioning a new name and a new life beginning. Spring crept slowly into the harsh land. One morning, Thomas stood on the porch, holding a small wooden box in his hands. "No contracts," he said clearly. "No debts hanging over us. Just choice, pure and simple." Eliza smiled, fierce and absolutely sure of herself. "Yes." The desert watched silently as they made promises to walk forward together. Not saved, not owned by each other, chosen freely. And every morning after that day, something small waited on the windowsill for her to discover. A flower, an interesting stone, a simple reminder carved into their daily ritual. He had chosen her from that platform. She chose him back, every single day. Peace never arrives all at once in a flood. It comes slowly, in small pieces. Quiet ones, fragile ones that must be protected. After the violence in the canyon, the ranch felt fundamentally different somehow. Not necessarily safer, just more awake and aware. Eliza healed slowly and imperfectly. Bruises faded from purple to yellow, then finally to memory. Her wrists scabbed over, split open again, and eventually closed for good. Thomas watched her recovery without hovering anxiously, though she felt his attention like a steady hand at her back, supporting without smothering. He cooked meals when she slept too long. He left fresh water by the door when the heat rose oppressively. He never asked directly what hurt. He simply noticed and responded. Caleb stayed for a few days, long enough to help with necessary repairs, and longer still to be absolutely certain the land had truly settled. Before he finally left, he took Thomas aside for a private word. "You drew a clear line in the sand," the old man said seriously. "Men like Calvin Ross don't forget lines drawn against them." Thomas nodded, understanding completely. "Neither do I," he replied simply. The words weren't particularly brave or boastful. They were just tired and true. They returned to the daily work, mending fences, maintaining the windmill, tending livestock. The simple rhythm of labor grounded them both. Eliza learned the land the way you learn to read a scar on your own body, slowly, with careful respect for what it had survived. Some nights, she woke up fighting invisible ghosts from her past. Thomas learned never to cross the threshold of her room uninvited. Instead, he sat on the floor just outside her door until her breathing steadied and calmed. Sometimes, he spoke his sister Elena's name softly. Sometimes, he said nothing at all, just stayed present. Some nights, Thomas woke shaking, Elena's face hovering close behind his closed eyes, accusing him of being too late. Eliza sat with him until dawn broke, her hand steady and warm on his back, anchoring him to the present. They did not save each other from their demons. They stayed beside each other through them. In town, Mercy Wells buzzed with gossip and speculation. People watched them more closely now than before, some with grudging approval, many more with open judgment. The preacher's wife made a point of crossing the street to avoid passing near Eliza. A rancher tipped his hat respectfully to Thomas, but said absolutely nothing, his silence speaking volumes. Calvin Ross did not come in person to confront them. Instead, he sent word through an intermediary, a folded paper that arrived with a writer who wouldn't meet Eliza's eyes directly. Thomas read it once, then read it again more slowly. "They're filing a formal claim," he explained, his voice tight. "For what exactly?" Eliza asked. "Harboring stolen property, obstruction of justice, vigilantism," he listed. Eliza laughed once. The sound came out wrong, bitter and sharp. All just fancy words for doing the right thing. "They're trying to make an example of us," Thomas said grimly. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. They prepared themselves, not for a physical fight, but for testimony and legal battle. Thomas rode out to neighboring ranches to quietly spread word. He spoke very little during these visits. He listened much more than he talked. Some doors closed firmly in his face. Others opened cautiously. Quiet offers of support slipped into his hands like contraband being passed in secret. Eliza stayed back at the ranch and threw herself into work. She cleaned the entire house thoroughly, mended every torn shirt she could find, and planted a small patch of beans near the windmill. She desperately needed something that would grow and thrive. One afternoon, she found Thomas sitting on the porch steps, his head heavy in his hands. "Say whatever you're thinking," she told him directly. He looked up at her. "If this goes badly for us, I want you to know. I'm not leaving you to face it alone." "I know," she said, sitting down beside him, close enough to touch if she wanted. But she didn't yet. "I won't let them take you," he said with fierce determination. "Not by legal paper or by force." Eliza met his eyes steadily. "I don't want to be protected like I'm helpless. I want to be believed and supported." He nodded slowly, understanding the crucial difference. "Then we make them listen to the truth." The day of the hearing dawned bright and absolutely unforgiving. They rode into town together, presenting a united front. The room smelled strongly of old sweat, accumulated dust, and aged wood. Men filled every available bench. Women whispered behind decorative fans, spreading rumors. Ross sat prominently up front, clean shirt, clean hands, clean lies ready to tell. Eliza stood when her name was called. She didn't lower her eyes submissively. She told them plainly about the auction, about the rope cutting into her wrists, about the numbers being shouted that reduced her to property. She spoke in clear, simple language. No theatrical tears, No dramatic flourishes, just truth. Thomas spoke next about contracts and legal technicalities, about what paper documents allowed men to do to women when nobody pushed back against injustice. A nervous murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Ross smiled thinly, playing his role. You deliberately interfered with lawful recovery of contracted property. I interfered with cruelty disguised as law, Thomas corrected him firmly. The magistrate frowned thoughtfully, asked numerous questions, wrote extensive notes in his ledger. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman stood up from the back. Mrs. Klein, a widow who owned the town laundry. She testified that she'd personally seen Eliza dragged through town in chains, weeks before the auction ever took place. She told them she'd heard the cruel laughter of men who enjoyed another person's suffering. Another man stood to speak, then another after him. The room's atmosphere shifted, not loudly or dramatically, but enough to matter. The ruling finally came at dusk, announced with legal formality. Charges dismissed, warnings officially issued to both parties, but no apology offered to anyone. Outside the courthouse, Ross deliberately brushed past Thomas and leaned in close enough that only they could hear. "This isn't finished between us," he said softly, making it a promise. Thomas didn't respond at all. Eliza did instead. "It is for me," she said clearly. Ross looked at her as if she'd just spoken in a completely foreign language he couldn't begin to comprehend. They rode home beneath a sky-bruised purple and gold by the setting sun. "I was scared," Thomas admitted quietly. "So was I," Eliza said honestly. "But not in the same way I used to be scared. It's different now." That night, he didn't leave a flower on her windowsill, as had become their custom. Instead, he knocked gently on her door. She opened it and waited, giving him space to speak. "I won't cross this threshold unless you explicitly ask me to," he said carefully. She reached out and took his hand in hers without hesitation. "Stay with me." They didn't rush into anything. They sat together on the edge of the bed and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. When he finally kissed her, it was careful and gentle, as if he was afraid of waking something too fragile to survive rough handling. Eliza kissed him back with steady certainty, showing him she wasn't fragile at all. Spring arrived and broke the land open with new life. Green growth appeared where there had been only brown before. The beans climbed their supports enthusiastically. The livestock fattened on better grazing. The windmill stopped its tortured screaming and settled into a steady, reliable creak. Eliza laughed more frequently now. Not constantly, but when she did, it was genuine and real. Thomas smiled more easily than before. He actually slept through entire nights. Then new riders came to disrupt their peace. 3 of them arrived in late afternoon, raising dust sharp and fast against the horizon. Eliza felt the approaching trouble before she actually saw them, the way the air seemed to tighten around her. Thomas stepped outside with his rifle slung over his shoulder, but clearly visible. The lead rider raised both hands in a gesture meant to appear non-threatening. "We're not here looking for trouble," he called out. "You found it anyway," Thomas replied flatly. They brought official paperwork with them. New seal, new judge's signature, same old malicious intent. "Search warrant," the man explained. "We're looking for stolen property." Eliza's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "You already lost this fight," she pointed out. The man shrugged with false casualness. Orders changed, apparently. Thomas's jaw tightened visibly. He read through the paper once carefully, then folded it with deliberate precision. "You can conduct your search," he conceded, "but you won't find what you're looking for here." The men dismounted and spread out across the property. Eliza stood firmly in the doorway and watched them cross her land, as if they had every right to be there. One man headed directly for the barn. Another moved toward the house itself. The third stayed uncomfortably close to Thomas, watching him too carefully. Eliza's hand drifted instinctively to the knife at her belt. She didn't draw it yet. Not yet. But soon, if necessary. The search dragged on far too long. Drawers were yanked open roughly. Storage chests were kicked aside. Walls were knocked on to check for hollow spaces. Then, a triumphant shout rang out from the barn. "Found something!" Eliza's breath stopped completely in her chest. Thomas moved first, with Eliza following close behind. In the barn, one man stood over a crate she'd never laid eyes on before. Ross's ownership mark was burned clearly into the wood. Thomas stared at it for a long moment. "So," he said, very quietly, "you planted evidence." The man's smile was quick and ugly. "Looks like we found what we were looking for." The third rider reached for his gun. Eliza moved instinctively. The world narrowed to a single point of action. Somewhere behind the barn, a rifle cracked. The rifle shot split the air like dry wood, snapping violently apart. Everyone froze instantly. Dust lifted from the barn wall where the bullet struck, embedding itself mere inches above the planted crate. The man who'd reached for his gun swore loudly and dropped flat to the ground. The others scrambled in panic, shouting over each other, hands flying desperately to their weapons. Eliza didn't waste time thinking. She moved on pure instinct. She shoved Thomas sideways hard enough to throw him completely off balance and drew her knife in one smooth, practiced motion. The blade felt familiar in her hand, honest and true. "Get down," she commanded sharply. Another shot rang out, this one closer than before, tearing splinters violently from the doorframe. The horses screamed in terror and pulled against their ties. Complete chaos spilled out into the yard. Thomas rolled behind a feed trough for cover and came up with his rifle ready. He didn't fire yet, though. He was searching for the source, trying to identify who was shooting. "Caleb," he muttered with sudden recognition. From the rise behind the corral, a gray hat lifted once briefly, then vanished back into cover. The riders clearly hadn't expected any real resistance. Not actual fighting resistance. They had expected fear, intimidation, maybe paperwork arguments at most. They'd badly misjudged both the land and the people who lived on it. Two more shots came in quick succession, fired with precise accuracy. One man spun around and dropped his gun, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. Another dove behind the windmill for shelter, his breath loud with mounting panic. "Callahan!" the leader shouted, desperately trying to regain control through authority. "This isn't how this has to go down." Thomas's voice cut back cold and absolutely clear. "You planted false evidence on my property. That makes you criminals, not lawmen." "You don't know that for certain," the man yelled back. "I know," Eliza said firmly, stepping into clear view with her knife held low and ready. "Because I didn't bring that crate here. You did. I know every single thing on this property." The leader's eyes flicked to her, quickly measuring and calculating his options. "Ma'am," he said, attempting to change his tone to something more reasonable. "Step aside and let us handle this." She didn't move an inch. Another shot cracked out from Caleb's position on the rise. Dirt jumped up at the leader's boots. He swore viciously and stumbled backward. "Enough!" he barked desperately at his men. "Fall back. Fall back now." They dragged their wounded companion toward their horses in a disorganized mess. One tried to grab the planted crate as evidence. Thomas fired once. The bullet tore the rope clean out of the man's hands. "Leave it," Thomas commanded. "And go." The riders mounted in a confused tangle of fear and wounded pride, retreating in a cloud of dust that tasted bitter and left everything feeling unfinished. Silence fell heavy across the property. Caleb emerged slowly from behind the rise, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder, his weathered face grim. "They won't stop coming," he observed. "They'll just bring more paper, more men, more false charges." Thomas nodded, accepting the reality. "I know." Eliza's hand shook now that the immediate danger had passed. She slid the knife back into its sheath and leaned against the barn wall, breath coming fast and shallow. Thomas crossed the distance between them and took her shoulders gently. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, searching her face carefully. She shook her head. "I was ready," she said simply. He searched her face, seeing something new there. Not fear, not defiance, but clear-eyed choice and determination. That night, they didn't even try to sleep. They packed quietly and efficiently. Caleb stayed long enough to help load a wagon properly and to burn the planted crate until nothing remained but ash and the truth it represented. Before dawn broke, he rode east carrying word for a judge who still remembered the crucial difference between law and justice. Eliza stood at the window as the fire died down to glowing embers. The smell of smoke curled through the room. "They'll say we ran away like cowards," she observed. Thomas set the last sack of grain by the door. "We're not running," he said. "We're moving," she corrected, understanding the distinction. He smiled once, tired but proud of her. They left at first light. The road south cut through low country and stone washes, places where the land naturally hid what it needed to hide. They traveled slowly, carefully. Thomas taught Eliza how to read the sky for weather changes. She showed him how to leave signs that only the desperate would notice and understand. By the third day, riders followed at a distance behind them. By the fifth day, they had closed the gap significantly. They made camp in a stand of cottonwood trees where the river bent and the night carried sound far. Eliza felt the approaching danger before she actually heard it. Hooves on hard ground, too many of them. Thomas handed her the rifle without needing to say a word. "I don't want to be the reason for more violence," she started to protest. "You're not the reason," he interrupted firmly. "You're the reason I don't back down." They took defensive positions. Caleb had taught her well during his stay. She breathed steadily and waited with patience. The men came loud and overconfident. Ross rode among them, his usually clean coat now dusty, his perpetual smile completely gone. "You could have made this easy on everyone," Ross called out. "You still can." Thomas stepped forward into the firelight. "You don't get to decide what's easy." Ross's gaze slid to Eliza with unconcealed contempt. "This woman has cost you absolutely everything." Eliza laughed low and sharp. "No," she corrected. "I gave it all back to him." Ross sneered openly. "She's nothing but trouble." Thomas didn't look at her when he answered. He kept his eyes locked on Ross. "She's my wife." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward. Eliza's heart kicked hard against her ribs. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't warned her. He'd simply chosen to claim her publicly. Ross's face twisted with rage. "You think that changes anything at all?" "It changes everything," Thomas said with absolute conviction. The first shot came from the darkness beyond the trees. The fight that followed was fast, brutal, and terrifyingly close. Eliza fired twice and hit her target once. She felt the impact jar her shoulder and kept breathing through it. A man rushed directly at her. She dropped the rifle and met him with her knife, using every survival skill that hard experience had taught her. Quick, decisive, final. Thomas took a vicious blow to his ribs and kept moving forward anyway. He drove Ross back steadily toward the river, fury controlled and cold. Ross slipped on wet stone and fell hard. Thomas stood over him, breath ragged, gun raised and ready. "You could end this right now," Ross spat up at him. "Law's still on my side." Thomas slowly lowered his weapon. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." Caleb's horse suddenly thundered in from the darkness. Two more riders came behind him, law enforcement with badges that caught the firelight. Ross went completely still. It was finally over. They returned to the ranch several weeks later. The land had waited patiently for them. Caleb rode on with their thanks and quiet mutual respect. The legal papers came through clean. No more claims filed against them. No more hired riders coming to cause trouble. One morning, Thomas brought Eliza a small box. Inside lay a simple ring, hammered from silver. "I didn't plan any of this right," he admitted. "But I won't wait any longer." Eliza slipped it onto her finger, her hand steady. "Good," she said. "Neither will I." They stood together on the porch as the sun rose, the desert stretching wide and honest before them. Tomorrow would bring work and memory and scars that would never completely fade. But today belonged entirely to them, and that was enough. The desert has a particular way of remembering. Even after the riders stopped coming, even after the law finally settled and the dust fell back into its natural place, the land held the echo of everything that had happened. Eliza felt it in the quiet mornings, in the way the wind moved through the grass, like a held breath, finally being released. They did not speak much about the fight. They spoke about work instead. Thomas rose before dawn again, but now Eliza rose with him. Coffee boiled, bread warmed, the small rituals stitched their days together. Not grand or dramatic, just honest and real. She took over, managing the ledger. He repaired the damaged north fence. They argued once about planting too close to the wash, and laughed together afterward when the beans proved her judgment right. At night, they learned each other slowly. Thomas learned where her scars pulled tight when storms approached. Eliza learned when his silence meant grief, and when it meant peace. They did not rush the healing process. They respected it. Word spread anyway. Some neighbors came by under the thin excuse of borrowed tools or broken equipment. They didn't say much, just nodded their understanding. They left jars of honey, a sack of seed, quiet offerings that meant more than any spoken apologies. Others never came again. Eliza stopped caring about who did and who didn't. One afternoon, a wagon rolled up carrying a woman with silver threading through her hair and eyes sharp with memory. She stepped down carefully and held Eliza's hands like she had been waiting years to do exactly this. "My daughter is alive because of what you did," the woman said. "I will never forget that." Eliza swallowed hard and nodded. Words felt far too small for the moment. Life did not soften after that. It steadied. The ranch survived the brutal summer, barely, but it survived. Rain came late and mean when it finally arrived. The windmill broke twice. Thomas cursed it. Eliza learned how to fix it anyway. In October, they stood together in the yard with a small circle of people who mattered. No preacher, no town blessing, just promises spoken clear. "I won't own you," Thomas said. "I won't cage you. I will walk beside you if you'll have me." Eliza met his eyes. "I won't be small for you. I won't hide my teeth or my scars. But I will choose you every single day I wake up." That was their marriage. They marked it with coffee and bread, and a single wildflower set between them on the table. The first winter was hard. Cold bit into the house, and old memories bit even harder. Some nights, Eliza woke fighting invisible ghosts. Thomas learned to wake without touching her, to speak her name softly until she found the present again. Some nights, Thomas woke, shaking, Elena's face close behind his eyes. Eliza sat with him until dawn broke, her hand steady on his back. They did not save each other from their demons. They stayed present for each other through them. Spring came gentler than expected. The land greened, the beans climbed. The livestock held strong. Eliza found herself smiling without noticing at first. One morning she found the windowsill empty. No flower, no stone. She frowned, then laughed softly when she turned and saw Thomas in the doorway holding a small wooden box. "I figured it was time," he said. Inside lay a silver dollar. Old, worn smooth by countless hands and the passage of history. "The same one," he said. "I tracked it down. Cost me more than it's worth." Eliza took it carefully, her throat tightening with emotion. "A reminder," he added, "of what people said you were worth, and how wrong they were." She closed her fingers around it. "Best dollar ever spent. Best dollar I ever waited too long to use," he said quietly. Years passed. Not quietly, but truly. Girls came sometimes. Women, too, sent by whispers and half-believed stories. Eliza never asked many questions. She offered a room, a lock, time. Thomas fixed fences and stayed out of the way unless needed. He learned when to stand in front and when to stand back. The desert kept its truths. Some stayed, some moved on. All left stronger than they arrived. One evening, long after the sun sank red and slow, Eliza asked him the question she had carried since the auction block. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. "Choosing me." Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked out over the land, over fences held together by stubborn posts and work done one day at a time. "No," he said finally. "I regret the years I believed pain was mine alone. I regret the moments I stayed quiet when I should have stood up." He turned to her. "But you? Never." Eliza leaned into him, feeling the truth settle. They were older when the story started spreading beyond Mercy Wells. People added flourishes, took liberties. Some got it wrong. Eliza let them. She knew the truth. It wasn't a dollar that saved her. It was a choice made and remade every morning, every hard night. On the anniversary of the auction, Thomas left no gift on the sill. Instead, he stood beside her in the early light, coffee steaming between their hands. "You still think I'd regret choosing you?" he asked quietly. Eliza smiled, fierce and sure. "No," she said. "I think we both regret waiting." The desert stretched wide and unforgiving and honest around them, and within it, two people stood who had been bought, broken, and counted wrong. They had counted themselves instead, and that made all the difference.